I want to start with a number. That is the percentage of Americans who reported having no close friends in 2021. In 1990, that number was 3%. In 30 years, the number of Americans with nobody to call, nobody to sit with in a hospital waiting room, nobody to tell when something goes wrong, nobody who would notice if they disappeared, has increased by nearly 6 times. This is not a personal failure. This is not a character flaw. This is a psychological and social crisis so large and so quiet that the United States Surgeon General declared loneliness a public health epidemic in 2023. And yet most people experiencing it believe they are the only one. Here is the first thing to understand about modern American loneliness. It is invisible. Not because people are hiding in empty apartments, but because the most common form of loneliness today looks nothing like what we imagine loneliness to look like. It looks like a full calendar. It looks like 100 followers and 0 people who know your middle name. It looks like being surrounded by coworkers for 8 hours a day and driving home feeling completely unseen. It looks like a family dinner where everyone is present and nobody is really there. Psychologists distinguish between 2 types of loneliness: social loneliness, the absence of a social network, and emotional loneliness, the absence of deep, meaningful connection. America has become extraordinarily good at filling the first while letting the second quietly disappear. The roots of this crisis go back further than most people realize. For most of human history, people lived in tight, overlapping communities. You knew your neighbors. You worshiped together. You worked near where you lived. You had a butcher who knew your name, a doctor who knew your family, a community that noticed your absence. Then, across the second half of the 20th century, several forces began quietly dismantling that architecture of connection. Robert Putnam documented this collapse in his landmark 2000 book, in which he tracked the systematic decline of American civic life. Bowling leagues, church attendance, neighborhood associations, block parties, union memberships, all of the informal structures that used to pull people into regular, repeated, low-stakes contact with other humans, gone or going. Americans began moving more frequently for work and for opportunity. Each move severed existing roots before new ones could form. The average American moves 11 times in their lifetime. Every move resets the social clock. Then came the suburbs, the car, the garage door that opens and closes without requiring you to interact with a single neighbor. The architecture of modern American life was redesigned without anyone quite noticing for privacy over community. And then, in the span of a single generation, came the technology that promised to fix all of this. Connection, at scale, available always, free. What social media actually delivered was something far more complicated. Research from the University of Pennsylvania found that reducing social media use to 30 minutes per day led to significant reductions in loneliness and depression. Not eliminating it, reducing it. 30 minutes. Because what social media provides is not connection. It is the simulation of connection, the vocabulary of intimacy without the substance, likes instead of presence, comments instead of conversation, the highlight reel of other people's lives consuming the time and attention that used to go toward building actual ones. Neuroscientist John Cacioppo spent decades studying loneliness and found something deeply important. The brain does not distinguish well between real social connection and the performance of it. In the short term, social media creates a dopamine response that mimics belonging. But over time, the gap between the simulation and the real thing grows larger, and that gap is where the loneliness lives. You can have 500 connections and feel completely alone. In fact, research suggests that heavy social media users are more likely to feel alone, not less, because the comparison and the performance and the shallow engagement leave the deeper need entirely unmet. Here is something the research reveals that most people find uncomfortable. Modern Americans are not just lonely. They are also increasingly avoidant of the very interactions that would relieve the loneliness. Studies from the American Psychological Association have found that anxiety around social interaction has increased dramatically over the past 2 decades, particularly among adults under 40. People report finding small talk exhausting. Initiating plans feels like an imposition. Phone calls feel like an intrusion. The muscles of social connection, the ability to start a conversation, to sustain an acquaintanceship, to show up consistently for someone, atrophy without use. And modern life has designed so many ways to avoid using them. You can order food, manage your finances, entertain yourself, and work an entire career without meaningfully interacting with another human being. The friction that used to force connection, standing in line, sharing a commute, waiting at a counter, has been systematically removed in the name of efficiency. And with every friction removed, another small opportunity for human contact disappears. This matters beyond feelings. The science here is unambiguous and alarming. Loneliness is not just an emotional experience, it is a physiological one. Research from Brigham Young University found that chronic loneliness is associated with a 26% increase in the risk of premature death, comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Loneliness increases cortisol levels, disrupts sleep, suppresses immune function, accelerates cognitive decline, and increases the risk of cardiovascular disease. The body, designed for connection, responds to its absence the same way it responds to physical threat. John Cacioppo described loneliness as the social equivalent of physical pain. Pain is your body telling you something is wrong and needs attention. Loneliness is your brain telling you the same thing. The problem is that unlike physical pain, loneliness carries stigma. Admitting you are lonely feels like admitting you are unlovable. So people carry it quietly, invisibly, while the body pays the full biological price. The research on what relieves loneliness is both simple and counterintuitive. It is not more social events. It is not more followers. It is not moving to a new city or forcing yourself to be more outgoing. It is consistency. Repeated low-stakes, in-person contact with the same people over time. Not deep conversation necessarily, not vulnerability or emotional disclosure, just the same faces, the same coffee shop, the same neighbor you wave to, the same colleague you walk to the parking lot with. Psychologist Robin Dunbar, who spent decades studying human social bonds, found that what distinguishes meaningful relationships from acquaintanceships is not intensity, it is time. Specifically, the accumulation of unplanned, unstructured time spent physically near another person. The antidote to loneliness is not a breakthrough conversation, it is showing up, again and again, in the same place, at the same time, until the familiarity becomes something. This is why the systematic removal of third places, the cafes, the parks, the libraries, the community centers, the churches, the bars, from American civic life has been so quietly devastating. These were not luxuries. They were the infrastructure of human connection. And when you remove the infrastructure, the connection doesn't find another way. It simply stops. If this resonated, reach out to someone today. Not a like, not a comment, a real message, a real call. See what happens.